the greatest way to communicate things that are true is fiction. Fiction, if it's art, not if it's propaganda, which my people, fundamentalist Christians, my people tend to turn all art into propaganda of one sort or another. And but if it's art, it actually creates more space than it uses. And it opens up a place for people to hear for themselves. A nonfiction, you're tending to reduce what they hear so they hear what you hear. There is history for us. Remember, I'm writing for my kids, so I'm placing it in places that they know, inside contexts that they will only understand. They will see things in the shack that nobody else will. And so we've been right on Wallowa Lake, right there in Joseph. We've gone up into the mountains. We found a little hunter's shack. It's all of those kinds of things are in the background and settings that they would get. And then I can wrap the concepts inside of that, and I can shift my own life enough sideways so that it's not a memoir. This is actually creating things out of iconic sorts of realities in my own life. Mackenzie is like 60% me, and Missy is like 50% me. Both those characters, Mackenzie Allen Phillips, his initials spell map. Melissa Ann Phillips, her initials spell map. And so there's an overlay of both those characters. And so Mackenzie really represents the struggle that I had with Western Christianity and that whole journey. I tended to be very much like in terms of emotion and the way that he dealt with the world, very much like Mackenzie. I have this very conversational way of processing things. And then Missy, is the sexual abuse for me started at 5, and so Missy's 5. I have a niece, my sister's first child, a niece who was killed the day after her 5th birthday. So we've got the overlay of those two realities as well. And so Mackenzie is, the journey to find some sense of beauty and reality in the midst of tragedy. And then Missy is the child that is in you that gets, sometimes for some of us, gets murdered along the way. And how does that resurrect? This is how I came to the whole subject of the character nature of God. 3 persons with one essence. And the early church they finally coined a term a few hundred years after Jesus, and that was perichoresis, which is the mutual interpenetration of one with the other without the loss of personhood. It's a very profound and beautiful idea. So I wanted the man in trouble to be a white guy, and I wanted his redemption to come from the wideness of human creation, right? And so to have a Black woman, to have a Palestinian Jew, right? And to have Sarayu being Asian. White men have dominated the world and done so much damage. And so there's an iconic expression just in terms of Mackenzie himself being a white guy. Even when Papa comes as male, it's First Nations, right? And they did that in the movie. I was so glad they picked that character. And so when it came to Sarayu as the Holy Spirit, that was also easy, but I didn't have a name. I remember I'm on the train going down to one of my 3 jobs, and I'm having this little conversation with God, going like, all right, I got Jesus. And I called Papa Eleusia, which is both a combination of Hebrew and Greek. The ground of all being, but Papa was great, and then I'm like, oh, is it okay to have to create a name for the Holy Spirit, because because I think it's very personal, our relationship with God. And so I'm on the train, I get down to work, and that particular job was working for a web conferencing company, and Counter Collaborative at the time, and I was in sales, and they get a call from India, and they hand it to me because I'm multicultural and all that kind of stuff. and it's Geetika Prabhu from India, and she needs some kind of a system for web collaboration. And about 2 minutes into it, I realized we don't have the right solution for her, but one of our competitors does. And so I say, Geetika, let me tell you, here's who to contact. They have the right solution for you. It's a better one than what we have right now. And then I said, but I have a question for you. Can you give me the words in your dialect for the wind? Because the wind has often been a metaphor for the activity of the Holy Spirit. And so she said, yeah. So she gives me about a dozen words. And I'm going down these words and I run into this one and I said, how do you pronounce this one? And she goes, well, it's an interesting word. It can be either pronounced with the accent on the first or second syllable. So it can be Sarayu or Sarayu. And I loved that it had a rolled R in it because white folks, most of the time can't roll an R to save their lives. And I said, oh, that's a beautiful name. Do you ever name your children Sarayu? And she said, no, but we do have a river named after this. And so I've got the wind and the river. So we've got all these. And I went, oh, that's fantastic. So here's the really important question. What kind of wind is this? Because I didn't want a tornado and I didn't want a hurricane and I didn't want a fart and and she said, these are her exact words. Sarayu is the common wind that catches you by surprise. And I started to cry. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah, it's like when you're so hot, you think you're going to die. And suddenly out of nowhere comes this wind and it cools you off and changes everything. That's where the name came from. And so it was perfect. And so you have all of this multidimensionality within the persons of God, but only a singularity. Christianity is monotheistic, like Islam and Judaism. And so you have that oneness, but part of the problem is if God has only been one, then love is not a possibility. The creation had to exist in order for God to love, because love always requires another. And so that's, again, part of the beauty of this.